but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we are showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make decisions.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because it happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having married wolves doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Hello there, how is everyone tonight?
Good, we haven't been here in a while, so we're back again.
No, I've been busy. I've been really busy.
Be back.
Right,
and Nick is here with us for this one, because lots of juicy issues to do with benefit and hospitals. And here to talk about
the full calendar tonight.
And here to talk about benefits and sanctions and immigration and all that kind of stuff is Ricardo Menéndez March from the Green Party.
Yes, let's do a little intro because I'm a little rusty on these. I want to make sure I get it right. Well, that seemed to work. Kia ora, Ricardo. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. Good to be here.
First question, how are you guys holding up at the moment? You've had a bit of an onslaught the last couple of days with the media. It has felt like a pile-on from the outside. For somebody like me who has a background in media theory and far too many degrees in the damn topic, it feels like what we call agenda setting, where the media is going, this is the story the public needs to know, and this is how it should be shaped, and this is what they need to think. I'm kind of curious, first of all, how everyone is holding up within the party and whether or not you guys have a sense of something similar or if I'm just completely out of left field here.
Yeah, well, and I think the agenda setting component is actually being driven, in my view, by political leaders who are actually quite threatened about the idea that it may be time to have a conversation about the role of the police and actually how the police in many ways are actually failing to keep some of our most vulnerable communities, for example, homeless people, safe. And that includes conversations around, for example, whether we should be resourcing other institutions like Māori wardens to take some of those roles. I think to me that threatens a lot of the status quo. And those are the kind of topics that ultimately do result in quite heated debate. But when it's a brown woman from a working class background saying those things, I think it also hits quite different to politicians who benefit from keeping things as they are. I acknowledge these are not easy conversations, but we're pretty steadfast in wanting to make sure that we can actually bring the voices of communities who are incarcerated or who are homeless into the House.
It is a much tougher conversation to have than things like woke is bad and let's get rid of DEI, which is a lazy conversation for some political leaders to have. I noticed yesterday, looking at Stuff, which is our largest media outlet, their front page of videos there was 8 videos and 7 of them were comments from other politicians around what Tamitha's done, with one example in that video list as well of exactly what it was that she was talking about. Is there an understanding within the House that you've come across that this is media playing a part in creating a narrative and are listening to these particular MPs and these particular voices over other voices that are in Parliament?
I mean, I think in in the NMMP environment, I think there is still a lot more to do when it comes to how the media reports on our plurality that we have in the House, and not treat, for example, political conversations in a kind of presidential style way where Christopher Luxon and Chris Hipkins get treated as sort of like the main actors. So I think there is some work to do in that regard. But at the end of the day, I acknowledge that we're vanguards in the space, that we're one of the few political parties who are willing to actually talk about holding the police to account. And I can acknowledge that in and of itself will create heated discourse. Now, what I do hope is that we can continue having conversations in the ground, for example, with frontline organizations who are working directly with homeless people in relationship that what is it that we need to do to create safety. And having come from the front lines, having worked with people on the benefit and homeless people, I know that if I had a heavy police presence outside my office where people on the benefit and homeless people would be coming in for support, that would actually not create a conducive environment for people to seek support. So I think those are conversations we need to be having about what does safety look like and what is the best use of time and resource from the police.
I'm going to hand over, otherwise I'll monopolize.
That's okay.
Yeah. So, Ricardo, yesterday we saw you and Louise have quite an altercation in the House when it came to homelessness, and they seem to be very obsessed in the fact that you were wearing a leather jacket. What was that like for you to be a part of?
Well, I think on the leather jacket stuff, I think this is just such an example of the politics of distraction, right? Because what I was asking yesterday was actually in relationship to a new benefit sanction that is being introduced. This benefit sanction is called compulsory money management. What that means is that if you're deemed to not be meeting your obligations, 50% of your benefit will be put into a payment card. That money won't be able to be used to pay your rent. What we know is that the average person on a job seeker benefit pays over 50% of their income on rent. So if you do some maths, what this means is that the average person on the benefit who's subject to this benefit sanction will literally be unable to keep a roof over their head. So I don't know how else I can explain that, as a benefit sanction will make people homeless. And I think that's really serious because it's presented as a non-financial sanction, as a sort of better alternative to the things that we have right now. But if it's going to also result in making people homeless, and I see in the comments that people are already commenting about 65% of their income going into rent, like you just simply won't be able to keep a house and a roof over your head. You can't even access hardship assistance while you're under this benefit sanction, for example. And to me, the fact that politicians are more upset and outraged about a jacket than their decisions making people homeless tells me so much about the priorities from people in positions of power right now.
And how does it feel to know that Louis keep dodging your questions, like many of us in the disabled community, many of us in the welfare community? You try and stand up for us, and she continues to dodge all of these important questions. I just think it's a really bad look for a minister.
I mean, I agree, and I think that the worst part of it is that I just think she doesn't care. I think the saddest thing is that cruelty is the point, and so I think she knows the answer to my questions, right? When I ask her how much does a person in a benefit pay on rent on average, she has those answers. Like I got those numbers off her own ministry, so it's not like she didn't have access to that information when she made those decisions. And I think to your point around disabled people, we know that many disabled people are on the job seeker benefit when they should be on the supported living payment. So the reality is that many disabled people will get caught up on this sanctions regime when they should be on benefits that actually shouldn't have these so-called obligations that shouldn't even don't even work to support people into employment. So yeah, it's really sad because she's also the minister for disabled people, and so it just feels like she's not really connecting the dots and or bringing the lived experience of disabled people into her work.
One more from me, and then I'll see if Nick got any questions. So we saw Erica Stanford recently announced that there are going to be restrictions on how disabled people can get visas. So, how have you been dealing with that? I know that your area's been particularly busy, so how's that been for you to deal with?
Well, so I'll take us back, right? Because I want to just briefly explain the situation right now for disabled migrants. So we've got a really weird situation where internationally New Zealand goes to the United Nations and says, yes, we support the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And that's quite a big commitment. And the United Nations keep telling us, like, actually, you're not meeting it because you keep restricting access to visas when it comes to disabled migrants. There's a policy that basically costs how much, or tries to cost how much you'll be like a so-called burden to the health system, and that results in disabled people facing deportation. Neurodivergent migrants, for example, children with an autism diagnosis literally being told and declined visas. But what happened recently is that ERICA is now adding even more requirements, particularly for neurodivergent and disabled migrant children, to prevent them from even accessing a student or visitor visa. So for example, if you're a disabled child, it could prevent you from even visiting family members or coming with your family. And I think that's really gross and disgusting, and we should all be worried about that because it basically reduces disabled people to a number. If Eric is so concerned about the pressure that neurodivergent migrants are putting on the education system, what she could do is actually resource our education system rather than cutting the support that disabled people get. So I think it's just like blaming migrants for her own government's complicity in not resourcing support for disabled people. And that's a pretty slippery slope. And we've seen it in America with how migrants get scapegoated and blamed for other types of decisions.
Have you got any questions or comments you'd like to make with Ricardo, Nick, or a question to him?
Yeah, just one question really, Ricardo, around the Social Security Amendment Bill that just went through. I was certainly one of the people that showed up to test in front of the select committee. But I was just wondering, Ricardo, if you had any reflections on the numerous people who are beneficiaries and who represent the beneficiary organizations. Can you just maybe talk a little bit about how that testimony landed for either yourself or for the committee, and whether you think that will have any impact at all on the committee's decision making?
Well, I mean, it certainly impacted me. I think it was amazing to see that we actually had a really large number of submissions on that bill, and so many that actually the committee, the government members, chose to not listen to everyone because they just couldn't accommodate them all. So it's actually really good to see that, the interest in the Treaty Principles Bill has actually filtered onto bills like this one. We did hear, as you said, from a lot of beneficiaries and people receiving income support and organizations supporting people on the benefit. I think what I took from it is that no person on the benefit supported this bill, and that actually, this is a good opportunity for the government to actually listen to the people impacted by the government's own policies, to actually listen to people on the benefit. And I think, to me, like what I find the saddest is that, when people on the benefit were generous enough to talk about their experiences of work and income, the government members, and I don't know, Nick, if you picked up on that, but you had the chair of the select committee being like, oh, but don't you think it's good that people are encouraged to get a job? And it's like, that's not the point of this bill. That this bill will literally just punish and sanction and push people into poverty. So I just want to say, huge acknowledgement to everybody who submitted, including you, Nick. But I feel really sad that the government members seem to just not care and turn their faces to the other side when people on the benefit were giving their contributions.
One comment I'd like to make is I found when you were doing your submission at the time, Nick, Joseph Mooney was quite rude to you at the time. I knew it. I can't get over that.
Maybe he was busy texting Carmel.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember that. Anyway, anything else from you, Paul?
Well, I've got a question for you about April 1st. it feels like a good day for a joke, but April 1st is the day that benefit levels are supposed to go up. Assisted living supposed to go up 2.22%, so the rate of inflation. The minimum wage goes up 1.5%, so below the rate of inflation, which means obviously driving more people into poverty. What is the feedback that you have heard from people about these particular changes? It happens every year. It's an annual adjustment.
Yes. I was literally yelling at Louis Upston in the chamber about this, because what I've actually hit the most, and I think successive governments are complicit on this, because as you've identified, every year benefits get adjusted. Every government likes to claim that it's something they did, and I'm like, it's literally automatic. Like, they don't have to do anything; it just happens. It's codified in our legislation. So yes, right now it's increasing at the rate of inflation. What I think it's really important for people to pick up on is that this is something that actually changed recently. So many years ago, it used to be inflation. The previous government changed it to increase benefits alongside wages. So why this matters is that normally in the long term, if you take the past sort of like 50 years, wages tend to go up faster than inflation. What this means is that benefits tend to go up more. So it's just a bit of a mathematical thing, but the government changed it back to inflation. So this year, it may seem like benefit levels will go up by a nice amount because inflation is high. But actually, in the long term, what it will do is cut benefit increases. In the long term, and the government was advised about this, is that more children will be left in poverty as a result of this change as to how benefits get increased. So, when I talk to people in the benefit, of course, anything helps when you're struggling to get by, but I think our communities shouldn't settle for breadcrumbs. Like, our communities deserve bread and roses. Our communities deserve livable incomes. So I think, sure, great, automatic adjustment, but it's like, this is not going to lift people out of poverty. And in the long term, the way that we're adjusting them will actually result in more people living in poverty.
The Prime Minister this week actually came out and claimed that the $35 increase to pensions was his idea, and that he was very proud of the supplemental payment that they were helping the elderly with. The pension is obviously our largest social welfare draw, and it's only going to get bigger as we have an aging population. How do we as a country deal with that? I don't want to use the word burden because that's not the right word for it, but it's almost an obligation. How do we as a country deal with the cost of that obligation?
So two things. This is why last term I pushed hard to have the adjustment to superannuation and benefits to be wages or inflation, whichever was higher, to guarantee that people always got the highest possible increase. When it comes to superannuation, I want to say that actually the narrative of superannuation being a burden is a complete right-wing frame that is not grounded on reality. In terms of proportion of our GDP that we spend on things like superannuation, we're not even one of the highest countries out there. What the superannuation does is create that basic income for people over 65. That means they're not living in poverty. It's 1 second, sorry. And I just got a call, sorry. But the point being is that the superannuation, the way we address the cost is actually by taxing the wealthy few. That's how we raise the revenue. Cutting or means testing superannuation will actually only increase inequities. So I just always caution on this idea of painting the superannuation as a burden. The costs will of course increase because we have an aging population. But what we also have is a lack of taxes on wealth, taxes on capital gains tax, on a bunch of other measures that would allow us to make that sustainable. If we means test superannuation, we just pass on those costs to the health system. We pass on those costs to housing and other spaces. So I think I'm a big fan of protecting superannuation because when it first got introduced, it helped reduce poverty rates for elderly people by a lot. And I think if we restrict access to it, it will only lead to an increase in poverty amongst our elderly.
So happy with keeping it as a UBI, Universal Basic Income?
Absolutely. And if anything, it shows us that actually we already have a bit of a basic income in Aotearoa in the form of the superannuation. I think there's an opportunity to actually model that in our welfare system. And so I would say that, that's what we've been fighting for, kind of getting rid of those sanctions and actually universalizing income support far more. But I think the superannuation is something we should protect. It's actually, like, I think, a genuine national treasure and something we've done so really well. Yeah.
I've had a question come in as well from the chat, so I'll pop this one up here from Not Bernadette. Did you know that DSS under MSD have internal policies that override people's communication rights that need assistive technology to speak?
So, I mean, yes, in the sense that, like, so what I understand from that question is that MSD does not accommodate people's communication needs when it comes to how, you know, they communicate with people, and that actually results in, say, for example, like creating additional barriers for you to get in touch with work and income when you need assistance, like, and so that's how I'm interpreting this. Like, but the other part is that ultimately, you know, in terms of the resources that they put in place to ensure that their communications are accessible, I think it's not good enough. And what I really worry about, you know, like in terms of communications and MSD, is that it's all moving towards just everything's on the app, and on my MSD or over the phone. And actually, by not having those kind of frontline people services, you're actually cutting a lot of disabled people from having that human interaction. That means you can actually, like, express your needs in a much more sort of fulsome way, rather than just kind of have this kind of more kind of machine to person interaction. And I'm just seeing another comment around the speech to text device. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's something that should absolutely be better resourced, because the feedback I've gotten is that access to MSD isn't super accessible.
You guys have got anything else, or should I ask a tricky hardball question?
Go hardball.
We saw a report that came out today around the health. This is also a nice way to sort of segue into the guest who's waiting in the waiting room. We saw a report come out today that said over the last 10 years, access to primary health and emergency health and wait times has been expanding. It's been causing issues long-term with the health sector and with people's ability to be able to look after themselves. From the perspective of somebody who is working with benefits, how much of an impact do you see that having on people's access to healthcare? And while you're giving that one a consider, I will bring in Dr. Gary Payinda as well, who is sitting there in the waiting room.
Oh, Gary, yes, I know Gary. Look, what I will say on this is that everybody loves talking about hospitals, but nobody wants to talk about primary care, which is the access to healthcare that stops. Look, what I will say on this is that everybody loves talking about hospitals, but nobody wants to talk about primary care, which is the. Okay,
here we go.
Sorry, I think Gary may have a bit of feedback going on. Sorry, but
Gary, turn down YouTube.
But what I will say is that actually
can't hear you.
We do need to invest in primary care. What we have in Aotearoa right now is an issue where primary care is predominantly delivered by the private sector, and we have a formula to fund GPs that, and I'm not, Gary can maybe explain the maths better than I do, or in a simpler way, but basically what this means in practice is that GPs are incentivized to set up their clinics where there's a lot of people and a lot of elderly people. What this means is that if you're a GP, it's actually more profitable to set yourself up next to a bunch of retirement villages rather than setting a clinic in areas where there may be a lot of underserved communities. So we need to do several things in the primary care space, from my opinion. Gary,
can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear. I can hear you. We need to do several things in the primary care space, and what I would say to that is that we need to change the capitation formula. B, we need to have a really serious conversation about ownership models and actually start talking about bringing primary care into the public healthcare system. But we also just need to fund primary care better, because you can have all these amazing hospitals, but if people can't actually access their GP, they're going to be turning up to hospitals for things that actually could be treated at, potentially at a GP to begin with.
Kia ora, Gary.
He's muted now. Sorry.
You're on mute now.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. I don't know how much of that you caught, but we were talking about the report that came out over the last 24 hours that Lester Levy commissioned back when he was still commissioner, looking at the issues that had cropped up over the last decade or so within the healthcare system, where it pointed out that there isn't enough people being able to access things like primary healthcare and waiting too long to see a specialist, and that's causing issues down the line. I'm just kind of curious what your perspective is on that one.
So, I mean, what's frightening for me as an emergency doctor is that part of what they reported was an increase in the number of patients, almost a doubling of patients who left without being seen. And the other concerning aspect is that those patients had bad outcomes, deaths, at an increased rate afterwards. So we know that one of the riskier aspects of emergency departments that are overcrowded and understaffed is that we don't get to patients in the waiting room. And of course, if you leave a waiting room full of 40 patients or more waiting for 4 hours or longer, sooner or later, it's like Russian roulette, sooner or later, a preventable yet very bad thing will happen to one of those patients. And of course, it's happening to my patients, and we take that very, very personally when you're a doctor trying to run that ED that night, or you're a nurse trying to manage the waiting room. And you've got literally dozens upon dozens of patients. It's very hard to pick out the needle in a haystack, and bad things certainly happen when you delay emergency department care. So yeah, the scary thing for that report was just not just the numbers of left without being seen are going up, but the deaths are also going up. Now, we don't know exactly who those deaths are or what their story was, but it's not a good thing. And of course, patients deserve much better than to be left waiting for hours and hours and hours.
Out of curiosity, because I'm pretty sure I know what your stance is on this, Ricardo, have you seen an increase of people coming in for emergency care, Gary, that wouldn't be there if they had been able to access prescription medicine instead of the charge being put back on it at the beginning of this term?
Okay, so to answer that question, I first need to clarify one thing. There are two groups of patients that are concerning in EDs. Number one are just the sheer number of patients that might be coming there. And yes, some of them can be diverted, but those are not typically the low acuity ones. The not so sick ones are usually not the people for whom bad things happen. That's not probably the biggest reason that I don't sleep well at night. The much, much bigger problem is that our hospitals are far too small and far too understaffed to accommodate the very sick patients that need to be admitted. So sick you can't go home. You need intravenous antibiotics. You need to see a cardiologist in the hospital, whatever the case may be. And those patients' numbers are obviously rising as our population gets older. Those are not a group that can be easily handled by another GP or nurse practitioners. And yet what we have going on is the intentional, very intentional underfunding of healthcare. You know, these are all decisions, right? These decisions about public housing, teachers, school lunches. These are conscious, eyes open decisions to prioritize other things more highly than the public, than social needs. And, you know, we've set aside $216 million to protect Philip Morris Tobacco Company, to make sure that they can sell lower cost cigarettes to cause cancer to New Zealanders. We've set aside $2.9 billion to make sure property investors can have an easier time and a cheaper time of getting a mortgage than a first home, a desperate, poor first home owner. So yeah, this is intentional. And that's the bit that hurts the most, because the rhetoric is, oh, there's no money. Well, I can tell you where to get $2.9 billion, get it back from the property investors. And if you want to say that money goes to mom and pop homeowners who own a batch that they rent out, well, then let's just exempt those people that have one additional property. But what instead we have are people who have 100 or 200 rental units, rental properties, being given taxpayer dollars in preference to everybody else in the community. So government's looked out for their own, and yeah, it's left a bad situation in our emergency departments. And yeah, sorry to rant. I always do this. Don't want to do it. To answer your question, yes, it would be great if we had a functioning and not catastrophically underfunded GP service that could adequately take care of primary care patients. That's huge. That's essential. And that's a duty that's been abrogated by this government almost completely. But it goes beyond that to understaffing nurses who could staff hospital beds and take care of the very sick patients who also are coming up against problems. So when your local politician tells you there's a 10 or a 30-year plan for rebuilding hospitals, you have to ask why they've been letting in a large number of inward migrants, but not building any of the infrastructure those people need. So everyone agrees we want people to come in and enrich this country and work hard, yet we're not investing in the schools and hospitals that both the newcomers and the old comers need. And so we've been doing this for so long now that we're just catastrophically behind the 8 ball. And maybe government will address it, but I see no desire to address it. I just see a push to privatize it.
I'm just gonna
Ricardo?
Kia ora, Gary. Yeah, I think this just on that, I think there's a lot to unpack because I think the issue in immigration is more to do with the fact that we don't have, I guess, what we call a national policy statement on immigration to plan immigration settings in relationship to infrastructure. I think, but I also want to acknowledge, for example, the Dunedin Hospital is largely being built by migrant workers. So there's that. The second part is, I think, to my comment around the politics of hospital infrastructure is that I do think primary care just doesn't feature in the political discourse enough. And what that has meant is that things like our capitation formula and how, GPs function is rapidly changing. We are seeing a lot of community-based GP clinics being bought by corporates, like the Green Cross is a really good example of that. And I think that actually, like, the politics of hospitals, I think, need to revolve, as you say, about the staffing issues in relationship to both, like, hiring enough staff and resourcing the hiring enough staff in the public sector, and paying them well, so that we can actually retain those workers. Because right now what we have is we're training healthcare workers so that they can go to Australia to work because they pay better wages. So it's a bit of a and in terms of saying, actually, we need better pay for our healthcare workers. We need better quality hospital infrastructure, and we cannot ignore that unless we have a hard conversation of bringing things like primary care and dental into the public healthcare system and to make those things free, we're going to be having people showing up to hospitals for dental or oral health related issues that could have been treated at a dental clinic, and not being left to rot until you're in so much pain that you just can't function. So that's, I think, kind of my thing. And yeah, as Gary said, tax reform has to be part of the agenda. Taxing the wealthy few unlocks the resources for us to have a good functioning healthcare system. It can absolutely be done. It's just a matter of political will, and we cannot be setting up our healthcare system to fail like this government is doing it right now, so that they can then justify privatizing our healthcare system or bringing in private-public partnerships. And absolutely, to Dave's comment, it is a lot cheaper in the long run to address the issue and to fund our healthcare system than to then allow for people to get really sick and then requiring a more expensive care. And it has lifelong consequences. It's not just about the cost. We're talking about people's livelihoods here.
I was just going to ask you, Ricardo, before we go on and talk about health, did you want to stay, or are you?
Oh, I'd be keen to let Gary get the mic because I'm a ranter as well. So, but hey, Gary, long time Twitter fan. I appreciated your reckons over Twitter on health, and thanks for all your support on our dental policy over the election.
Likewise, Ricardo. Likewise.
Thank you for coming, Ricardo. It was a pleasure to speak with you this evening. And
Thank you.
for your
Thank you for
message
having
too.
me. No
You're
worries.
very welcome.
Kia kaha.
Okay, to next weekend.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye. Right. Hello there, Gary. How are you?
Hey, Blake. How's it going?
Good. So, one of the main reasons I got you here this evening is I had was the pleasure to be interviewed by Radio New Zealand today, and we were talking about what I was talking to about privately last week about OT funding not being accessible and the local OTs being really supportive, but them not having access to funding, and that story will be out next week. Have you heard any more stories? I've been able to read up any more since I spoke to you last week.
No, I haven't come across any hard information for you. Yeah, not specifically as regards that. I mean, what I can speak to is just sort of an ongoing, almost day by day, there's a news story about how things are getting worse in health. Well, I shouldn't say worse, right? Because it's not getting better for everyone, not getting worse for everyone. It's getting better for some. And if you are a private hospital owner, things are going wonderfully for you. If you are a disabled person trying to get care within the system, if you're a beneficiary, if you're trying to get home help, you are being preyed upon, vilified. But yeah, it goes deeper than that. I mean, we've got David Seymour calling public health doctors Muppets and telling them to get back in their box. We've got Simeon Brown, who's the so-called Minister of Health, telling public health doctors who've spent years of their career training that they're not supposed to do their job, and they're just supposed to concentrate on vaccinations and not on the other things that impact people's health, like tobacco, like alcohol, like clean air and clean water, which is fundamentally part of what a public health doctor does. So, yeah, no, I don't have a direct info for you except to say that everywhere it is getting worse if you come at it from the point of view of a patient, and it's getting a lot better, i.e. more profitable, if you are the owner of a private health insurance company or you own private equity shares in a private hospital in New Zealand or a private imaging center, because they're going like gangbusters.
Yeah. Again, that story will be out next week. If anyone wants to check it out, I'll make sure we link it when it comes out. So one thing that was really prevalent during the my time with Ruth Hill, the reporter today, was that she said she'd heard a lot of similar stories about what's been going on. As a emergency doctor, are you seeing similar issues with OTs and with speech language and with that in your own hospital for the inpatients? I know you can't speak to the outpatients, but have you been having issues with inpatients as well?
Yeah, so I always want to talk about things that I have some exposure to, and outpatient services is not something that I interact with that much, but I can give you the emergency department corollary that you might find interesting, that I know was also part of all of these issues. For you, it's been of relevance in your life. The ability to obtain ultrasounds in ED or advanced imaging, CTs, MRIs, all of these ancillary services help support the direct provision of care. And what we're having now, I mean, this hiring freeze that government refuses to call a hiring freeze has decimated our departments. When they're being told they can fill 2 positions out of 45 vacancies, that's a problem. When we're hearing nurse managers tell us that a person applies for maternity leave to get someone to fill in, like locums cover over their maternity leave, and the delay in getting that role filled, that vacancy filled, is so long that the person is about ready to return back to work after their childbirth, and the position is still not filled. Now, what's come out is a scandal recently that Health New Zealand was saying that its palliative care, pediatric palliative care specialist position that they had a vacancy for, they were saying that there was active recruitment for someone to fill it. There's only one, my understanding, there's only one pediatric palliative care specialist in the nation within the public system. And that person went on leave, an extended known about leave. And so Health New Zealand, in response to Radio New Zealand, said, of course we're actively recruiting for that job. Then Radio New Zealand noticed that an ad went up later that day after the interview was aired for a general pediatrician with pediatric palliative care interest. And RNZ said, did you guys just put that ad up like a few hours ago after our talk? Because it wasn't there before. And yeah, that's what happened. And then RNZ investigative journalists asked, but why are you advertising for a GP with a side interest in this? Why aren't you asking for a specialist? And I don't think there was an answer forthcoming. And then a few hours later, the ad changed to say experienced pediatric palliative care specialist needed. So there's funny business going on, not just when journalists ask, but the same sorts of things are happening for all the mid-level management that tries to get their vacancies filled, who say, we have 30% vacancies in this department. We need to fill that. People are getting harmed. And they're being told, we're working on it. And as far as we can see and believe, they're not working on it. And so that's become very, very concerning. And so the question is, how many positions are needed and how many are being recruited for? And if that number doesn't match up, you've got a problem. So really it's on government now to prove that they're being honest about things. And a little bit of honesty would be refreshing.
Is there anything you'd like to ask Nick of Gary?
Yeah, Gary, it's really interesting to hear your perspective on this. I really come at this from the perspective of how can we make our health system more accessible and inclusive for our disabled population. One of the things that I've been really trying to work on is how do we make our primary care system more inclusive and accessible for our disabled population so they don't have to get to the ED departments. So I'm really trying to do you out of a job almost, but it's not working. So clearly you're going to be in work for a little while. I suppose my question is really around what can we do in the emergency department to make for example, things like NZSL interpreters and the ability for our patients when they come in to be more to make that experience better for our disabled patients, because I know that a lot of patients, particularly from our deaf community and others who are non-verbal, find the hospital experience very, very challenging.
The lowest hanging fruit there, and the obvious response from me would be, we have very affordable employees called healthcare assistants, HCAs, that in old days, a generation ago, you might have called them an orderly, but they do so much more than just push people between departments. They are there to be intermediaries, caregivers, helpers, sitters, assistants. And what you need is to adequately staff those healthcare assistants in emergency departments and elsewhere in the hospital. Because, you know, the doctors are doing their thing, the nurses are doing their thing, and you don't want the patient to get forgotten about in all of that, even when things get busy. And a healthcare assistant, having adequate staffing of them in the ED is not going to break the bank in terms of costs, but it can. Just imagine when we've got a patient with dementia, how much better that person's care and hospital experience is when there's a healthcare assistant that can check in on them every 30 minutes to make sure they're comfortable, to help reorient them, to give them a warm blanket, some food, make sure that they don't get forgotten about and don't get, you know, liquids. It's such a simple human touch. And again, it is not going to break the bank. And yet our staffing of those essential workers is horrendous, to say the least. They would help not just disabled patients, but any patient in need, any patient that needs a little bit more help negotiating life. An HCA helping you out every 20 or 30 minutes can be absolutely game-changing. And instead, we have so few that even the sickest or most needy patients often struggle to get one. And so you've got mental health patients, and again, elderly patients that could like their care would be so much easier and more efficient, not just beneficial to them in a way of delivering them some humanity, some humaneness, but better for the flow of the department, the efficiency of the hospital. And yet there's such a profound short-sightedness, Nick, in thinking we're going to save a few dollars by making people's experience more demeaned and miserable. It's not the New Zealand way. And I've been here 17 years now, and it's not the way it used to be. Things are getting worse, and we're moving towards what I recognize very strongly as a two-tiered system. Haves and have-nots, you know, wealthy and poor, private hospitals and private radiology centers and private surgery centers that have all the bells and whistles, and the community hospitals not having CTs, not having beds. So David Bailey just came out and did a bit of a whistleblowing action that has garnered him immense respect from probably every doctor in the country. He said that for the $50 million that Simeon Brown is now going to spend to privatize the waiting lists, he's going to put 10,579 elective surgeries out for tender to the private hospitals. So this Dr. David Bailey, who's a public-only doctor, obstetrician gynecologist, ahead of his department, highly revered by his colleagues, and not a guy prone to being outspoken. He said we could have handled those cases in-house on open up a Saturday clinic in theater, pay us for extra time, bring a nurse in. And he says that the Te Whatu, the Health New Zealand, said, sorry, no money for the theater nurses. We can't hire a nurse to open up the theaters. It's just not there. It's out of budget. So it's out of budget to do something cost effectively, but somehow you can come up with $50 million to give it to the private sector, who's going to suck away 10 or 15 or 20% profits that will never go to patient care, who are going to charge you premium, top-notch dollar costs, and who are going to suck the surgeons away from the public hospitals and into the private sector. So this is disastrous on so many levels. And yet these politicians currently in government keep selling it as some positive. Oh, we're going to get those lists down. It'll be so good. Yeah, but you are stealing $50 million from the public sector and ensuring that it will provide worse care a year from now than it would have if it had got that money. So this is privatization. I recognize it from the United States, having left there 17 years ago. And it is a tragedy to see it happening here. So Nick, I don't know if that answers your question, but there's a very simple answer. Invest in an affordable staff member, a healthcare assistant, to provide humane care to patients who are disabled in the ED. We can do that. We're a good enough country that we can do it and we can afford it if our priorities are right.
What would you like to add? What would you like to add, Paul?
I was going to ask what your opinion is of the announcement on a new South Auckland hospital at some point in the future.
So first, you got to say wonderful. It's wonderful that someone in this government is thinking about South Auckland, understanding that Middlemore Hospital is under an unbelievable amount of strain. I just recently had some dealings with Middlemore and got to really get a good look into their problems. And they've got a bunch of really noble people that work there, impressive. And the problems they face of understaffing and under-resourcing and a lack of infrastructure are just beyond belief. The kind of thing that in a richer, whiter community would have people up in arms, marching in the street. I mean, the Dunedin marches would be nothing compared to what the Middlemore public should do, but for many reasons doesn't do, is not able to do. And so given that they have such immense stress and underfunding and understaffing and under-resourcing in South Auckland, a new hospital in Drury will be wonderful. But you notice that they said it would happen sometime in the 2030s. So that's what, ages from now. You notice that it doesn't come with a funding mandate. It's not ring-fenced. It's not protected. This is just words. It's hot air. It's part of the same BS that has been produced just incessantly over the past, year and a half of promises. And I say that with, I think, some evidence behind it, because if you look at what's happened in Whangarei Hospital, we were told that we would get a hospital rebuild. It was budgeted for it years ago, and it has been at great risk of being paused and stopped constantly. Aspects of it have happened. There's a child health outpatient building that's going up. There's the plans are for a new ED and ICU. It's called an acute services building to go up in several years. There's some funding for that, supposedly, that has not been stolen for other purposes yet. So very reassuring, very good. But I recently went to a talk about this from higher ups, people who know what they're talking about, management, and learned that where all the patients will actually be housed, which is called the patient towers, and there's 4 of them that are theoretically planned for. In other words, the main part of the hospital, right, where the medical and surgical patients stay overnight and stay for days and get treated. Big towers, 4 of them. There's no design for them. There's no planning for them. There's no funding for them yet. And yet the rhetoric is the hospital will be ready to go and operational by 2032. Now, come on. How can you have
That's only 7 years away.
more than half the hospital unfunded, unbudgeted, for years from now, how can you really say that's happening? Just like the only thing I believe anymore is when I see the actual building happening with the guys up on the building. Then I know it's happening. So some small buildings are going up. That's cool. But I just learned about this like about a week ago, and I put it on my Substack. If anyone wants to read all the painful details of all of this stuff, it's on my Substack. Just type in the word Gary Payinda. And you'll understand that what they say and what they actually do are two completely different things. And so they say the entire hospital will be operational by 2032, and yet all of the patient towers don't have money set aside for their building. So it boggles the mind. So Paul, when someone says there's going to be a new hospital many, many years from now, over a decade away, I have to say, okay, it sounds wonderful, but I think it's pure hot air, just words, nothing more.
It's very chilling, isn't it? Very terrible. Have you had a chance to meet with Simeon yet, Gary?
No, I would love to sit there and talk with him like I'm talking with you guys on air, maybe on your podcast. You should put out a request for it. I would like to have the chance to sit and talk with him. It'll be a wonderful chance for him to explain the great things he believes his government's doing. And for me to ask about certain things like, we're making these promises, and I know why they haven't set aside money for them and why they've spent that money elsewhere. This is part of a privatization push. Like, you come out at the 11th hour and you say, oh, no money, gave it all away to landlords and tobacco companies and tax cuts that went to the people who needed it least. The only thing we can do now is team up with some corporations to fund it and build it so that we can become renters in our own house, renters in our own land in perpetuity. So we will get these buildings and these roads and these prisons, and we will subsidize these companies, these corporations to build them. And then we will be on the hook for renting them back, ensuring corporate profits for decades. And that it's played out in other countries. This is part of it's like a neoliberal playbook. This is how they work. And going after essential public services and selling off public housing and infrastructure is all part of the plan. And yeah, I would, Blake, why don't you ask Simeon for me? Ask him to come on, and we will talk about every one of these issues. 2 hours of his life. He's now the health minister. It'll be all directly health related. And I would love the opportunity to discuss these issues with him, shall we say?
I have asked him and he's refused. So feel free to spend the next minute or two pitching some more why he should come.
If any of your listeners want to write to him, I'd appreciate that immensely. It doesn't have to be me. It can be any advocate of public services who could come and speak with him about these concerns. Because from where I sit, it looks brazen what they're doing. I view them as vandals and arsonists of the public healthcare system and of essential public services in general. And I see them there as an enormous force for corporate profits and little more than that. If you look at how many bad things have happened that affect the lives of ordinary people, working class people, poor people, beneficiaries, there's a common theme in all of it. And the one constant running under all of it is that everything they've done assists corporate profitability. It's the one common thread. You think, oh, why this hatred of school lunches? Why this or that? It seems so random and ideological. Every single thing helps a corporation profit from the breakdown of society, the breakdown of public services within the country, the breakdown of health and education, and the New Zealand Defence Force, and the New Zealand Police, and teachers, and it just goes on, and public health doctors. It just doesn't end. And the one common thread is making sure that companies like McDonald's and Philip Morris, Compass Foods, are profiting beyond belief.
Before I let you go, I just want to ask you about, and maybe Nick would like to comment. You said earlier about they offered to do the theatres on a Saturday, but the ministry declined. The fact that it's very hypocritical statement for Mr. Brown to say that he would like timely quality healthcare, but yet he won't let theatres open on weekends, but yet he can pluck out $50 million, as you said, to go private. That just blows my mind. It just blows my mind.
Okay, it blows our mind because you and I are human, and we have an interest in regular people not suffering, okay? But forget about that, Blake, for a second. Just look at it purely from dollars and cents point of view, purely from a corporate profitability point of view.
Mm-hmm.
If you reduce the waiting lists through using the public system, you can't inject $50 million into the private system. And all of the corporations that support you are a little bit less keen on you if that happens. And so I believe that, just to be honest, government is responding to its constituents, not you and I, its real constituents, the ones that matter more greatly, more significantly. And those are the people with great money. And like, if you look at Compass, right? David Seymour wanted to destroy school lunches. When he couldn't do that because public backlash was too great, he put himself in charge of them. And instead of canceling them in one fell swoop, he cut them, death by 1,000 cuts. And he harmed New Zealand's small and medium businesses throughout the nation. Jobs were lost, communities were damaged by the loss of these small caterers and small restaurants that were supplying local schools with healthy, fresh, and good food. And he gave it to an absolutely horrid and corrupt multinational corporation. Read about Compass Group. Read about its Listeria and Campylobacter poisoning events. Read about it being found guilty of bribing United Nations officials so that it could get contracts. Read about its failure to deliver timely and healthy food in the UK and elsewhere. It's a huge multinational. It's kind of everywhere.
The story that always got me
people,
about
like people again, like you and I are like, how could David Seymour have done this? How did he not know? Did he not do his research into Compass to know that they were so bad and so evil? But again, it's coming at it from a incredibly naive and well-meaning place. But look at it the other way and say, if you're a neoliberal right-wing government bent on austerity, but only austerity for the poor, for beneficiaries, for the public, for public servants, for working class people. Well, if your real constituency is multinational corporations and you want to boost their profitability, what is better than giving $85 million to Compass Foods to provide food services in New Zealand? And if the side effect of that $85 million like absolute waste of money is that the system collapses, well, David got what he wanted. He gets the collapse of the public school lunch system, and all of it then has to revert to corporate food processing plants that truck food in, 700 kilometers. He wins almost no matter the outcome. Like, they've nailed it, and I have to give them credit. They have done more things faster than you ever thought they could, and they've been the biggest friend, big tobacco and the electricity generators. I was looking at the numbers on beneficiaries today and how much money they get, and how all these news media places are reporting, oh, there's only been a 0.3% decrease after taxes, after housing costs and inflation on a sole beneficiary's benefit in total income. This is an MSD study in 2024. It's obviously gotten worse since then, but and then you look at the real numbers for inflation versus the numbers they were using. You see that electricity prices have been going up at a fantastic rate. They're in a bad way for regular people right now. And of course, that means very, very good for the big four, Meridian and Contact, and those people are making profits. I think one of them, Meridian, if I'm not mistaken, has doubled its profit in 6 months. So if you were to factor in the real cost of living for people struggling, you would realize that the numbers we use are so rigged that, of course, it's almost like the homelessness thing, right? We have Ms. Upton or whatever her name is saying, "Oh, we've got so many people off of emergency housing. Thousands. It went from 4,000 to 6,000 down to whatever, less than 500. It's been an amazing success." Yeah, if you ignore the heaps of homeless that have been created from emptying out those emergency housing places. Now, I'm not saying emergency housing's great. We should have built those people homes. We should have social housing, public housing, and provide houses for people who need them, who struggle to afford to get them. We should do what Vienna does, and 1 in 4 houses there are owned by the government, and they're about as capitalist and as aggressively pro money as you can get. But they've realized that providing care for the public is a really good investment, and letting them decay into abject poverty and homelessness is not. But yeah, I've droned on enough, and I'm sorry to bore you guys with this stuff. It's nothing you don't already know, but each time I feel like there might be 5 people out there that like a little light bulb goes off on 5 or maybe 500 or maybe 5,000, where they say, hey, this isn't right. We can do better than this. And we certainly can, and we must.
We learn so much every time you come on, Gary, so please don't feel like you're boring us to death. Is there anything you want to say, Nick or Paul, before we let Gary go?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to respond to the point that Gary was making around that the surgery, the weekend surgery, that was chosen not to be funded because it's too expensive. That just makes me wonder about the narrative that's being pushed in that example, that our public service is not efficient, and therefore that the private sector is much more efficient. I think we really need to challenge that example and that ideological, the backing that sits behind that belief. Because I think actually when you look at it, and I'm sure Gary, you will understand this, that our public hospitals are far more efficient than the private sector counterparts in terms of delivery of operations and just general healthcare. And actually, if we invested that 50 million, just taking that example, into our public hospitals, we would get far more healthcare outcomes without question than just effectively giving it as a gift to private equity. So yeah, I think we need to push back very, very hard against that type of that type of gifting.
Undeniably, and I like the phrasing of that. Gonna write it down for later use. A gift to private equity, because that, I think, encompasses a whole lot of concepts that regular folks may not know. So can I just speak to that, and then I'll go 3 points about these right-wingers who will say things like the public system's inefficient, we got to go for the more private, the more efficient private sector. They're going to cut through these numbers. Couple things, and you got to read David Bailey's, or you got to watch his interview on RNZ. It was absolutely fantastic. But I'll add a few things to what he said, because he only had time for a quick soundbite. Number one, remember, when you farm these 10,579 procedures out to the private sector, number one, you're stealing surgeons from the public sector and anesthetists and other doctors and migrating them out to private. So you're going to lose a proportion of them forever. They won't migrate back. And what you're doing is you're diminishing, you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul. So they're going to follow the money, the $50 million, and you're going to weaken your public sector. So I think all of us would understand that that's really bad and incredibly stupid of them to be doing, of the government to be doing. Number two, when you send it to the private sector, they skim 10 or 20 or more % off as profit. That 20% never gets to become a patient service. If those cases stay in public, all of that 20%, it's a 20% boost in efficiency and cost effectiveness immediately before you do anything, because that money is staying within the public sector and not disappearing into private corporate pockets. And these aren't people like you and me. We're not huge investors in private equity. Well, almost by definition, we can't be in private equity. So this money will never come back. It goes abroad. It's essentially a legal form of tax evasion. You could call it tax avoidance, call it what you want, but a proper amount of taxes won't come off it, and it's gone. So boom. And then probably the biggest thing that David highlighted was cherry picking, because these privates will never take the patients who need the care the most, who are on the waiting lists. They will not take you if you are overweight, obese, disabled, have diabetes, have hard to control blood pressure, have multiple other medical comorbidities. And it's also going to select for people who are not poor, because you need to be able to, let's say, travel 3 hours down to Auckland from here. And in all of this, equity is kind of ignored. Like, that's not even a thing that we talk about hardly at all in this government anymore. And what it's doing is letting some people bump up on the list while ensuring that the very most needy people cannot avail themselves of these private procedures. So these privates will pick the easiest, quickest, simplest, and most profitable procedures to do. They're not going to be, you can't compare them to what we do in public, because in public, I don't have the opportunity to say, sorry, you're poor, you have mental illness, you are overweight, I won't see you today. It doesn't work that way. You take care of everybody based on their need, not on the dollar signs that are attached to them. And that's not the case for this 50 million. It's going to go, and it's going to be thoroughly cherry picked. They're going to go over those lists with a fine tooth comb and turn down everyone who smells like they might cost some money. And they will take the easiest cases, leaving the hardest, most expensive, most complicated ones in the public sector. Hey, you want to know an interesting reason, one of maybe 10, for why private healthcare, everyone says it's so efficient? Because as soon as you have a complication in the private sector, as soon as you're at that surgery center and something goes wrong, you throw a PE, you have a little heart attack, your blood sugars go out of whack and you're getting sick, you are immediately put in an ambulance and sent to a public hospital where all of the costs of your care will be borne by the taxpayers. So it's the biggest rort in healthcare going right now. And for all of those people who think, oh, I made it and I had my care done out in private and I loved it, you have to understand that you are selling your future. You are mortgaging your children off. You get your case done today or with this 50 million, and you ensure that you will be returning to a much worse off public sector. And, the public, the privates will play along as long as it's hugely profitable. I mean, they're owned largely by private equity, which means investors that want to maximize their returns. And this isn't a joke for them. It's not about the provision of healthcare. It's about the provision of profits. And so that's what we have signed up for. And that's what we've decided to jump, both legs into it, down this morass of privatization. And the studies have shown that the healthcare provided in private is actually worse for you. I mean, like physically worse for you. You will have a higher complication rate and a higher death rate. This is in numerous international studies showing that it's amazing, because it shows that public hospitals end up giving the best complication and the lowest death rates, like the lowest complication and death rates, followed by not-for-profit hospitals, which is interesting, followed by for-profit hospitals. And a lot of that has to do with intentional understaffing and intentionally, essentially cheapening the patient experience, cutting corners to maximize profits for corporate owners. And I mean, it's not rocket science. The data's there, we know it. And this is what Simeon Brown, he's grinning from ear to ear, him and Prime Minister Luxon, talking about how they're privatizing these waiting lists. They're just so proud. And they should be, because they're satisfying the constituents that they need to please. They will do good things for corporate profits in New Zealand. Now, sadly, it comes at the expense of the New Zealand public, society, and the health system, essential public services. But it's going to be very profitable for some, and it's a great day. How many of you guys on the call with me now have stock in private equity and are part owners of a hospital, as Shane Retty is or used to be, and as Lester Levy previously has been many, many times over? Any of you have stock in a private healthcare organization?
No.
I would urge you to fix that problem, because this government is going to do you proud if you do have some money in corporate profiteering.
Is there anything you want to say before we go, Paul?
Well, there is a million questions I've got for you, because I haven't even covered fluoride, but I know that we're running out of time. Especially because of where you live at the moment and your cuckoo banana pants mayor that you've got there, who likes to sit down and talk to alternative media like Counterspin. Real stand-up guy, that one. But I think we will hold off on that one until next time.
Well, I thank you for having me on, and thanks for putting this out there and doing this. I mean, if you weren't doing it, no one would be. I say no one, few would be, because that's not where the money is in. The right-wing media, what is it, the platform is that the one that's supported by that Wright family? Yeah. So, I mean, if you can get New Zealand's own version of an oligarchy backing you, you can do well. But to do that, you've got to sell your soul, and you've got to align with corporate profits. And so I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing. Thank you for having me on, and I wish you luck in the future. Good luck with this thing, buddy.
Really
Thank you. Thank you as always, Gary.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Right. We've got 13 minutes until 9 o'clock. I know it happens at 9 o'clock. So if there are any objections, I might just jump straight into the news, because it's like 10 minutes long. And I should also have a quick reminder to everyone that if you want to see the news sort of in advance, or if I'm doing like the pre-recorded version of this, becoming a member on YouTube gets that before anybody else does. And that's the thing that people tell me that they like the most for some weird reason, even though it's usually really depressing.
Shall we say shall we say goodbye here and just play the news?
Well, we'll play the news, and then if you guys want to disappear, you're more than welcome to. I'll do a quick sign-off afterwards.
Okay, I'll stay. Nick can go
All right.
if he wants.
That's all right. We'll
All
see
right,
how
we
it
can
goes. You might
sign
want to watch the news. Hello there, kia ora. I'm Paul, and welcome to this week's The News. This week, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here showing the time period he wants to see New Zealand emulate, celebrated an increase in pension rates, calling it a new cost of living support payment for senior citizens. The support payment is actually a legislated annual increase of 3% that occurs every year, and not just because the Prime Minister said so, and it will equate to an average increase of $35 per week for pensioners. Last year, pensioners saw an average median rent increase of 3.2%, food price increase of 1.5%, and in April this year, power companies will be increasing their prices by $10 a month for infrastructure costs, while continuing to rise the price of power every year until 2030. And price increases over the last 12 months has seen the price of power go up between 5 and 15%, as well as increased costs for medical care, which is often more accessed and needed by senior citizens. So this minimal increase will, I'm sure, help in some way. Thank God the Prime Minister let it happen, just like the law states. On Monday, the government announced new plans to replace the Resource Management Act, which will omit any mention of the country's first land contract, the Treaty of Waitangi. Māori Development Minister Tama Pōtaka, seen here trying to work out his McDonald's drive-through order at the box despite having been in line for 10 minutes, claimed he was not aware of the omission, despite signing off on the proposed changes. Said Pōtaka, "Oh, look, something shiny." As the cost of living crisis worsens, Deputy Prime Minister and New Zealand First Tanya Unkovic accepted a petition from turf group Speak Up for Women to legally define only 2 genders in legislation. The organisation, which spreads anti-trans rhetoric, disinformation about puberty blockers, vilifying the rainbow community and demanding punitive actions against the minority of less than 1% of the population that are trans people in amateur sport, handed over the petition to the pair while they quickly hid their tinfoil hats for a photo op and took a break from ignoring the long history of trans people existing. Scientists and psychologists who all have a better understanding of the lives trans people have and the persecution they face from people politicising their existence for votes. In the United States, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, seen here adding the Borg to a Federation group chat before the Battle of Wolf 359, has accidentally sent detailed war plans to the editor of The Atlantic. And since Winston Peters does everything the Trump administration does, but shittier, he sent a group text to New Zealand media with his war plans to win votes at the next election. New data out from MSD show the planned rollout of new money management cards for beneficiaries will leave some of them unable to pay rent. The cards are only to be used in specific locations, which do not include rental agencies or direct payments to landlords, and would contain half a benefit payment on them. But the average beneficiary's rent is now 53% of the benefit. Said Louise Upston, Minister for Social Development, seen here with all the beneficiaries she's helped find gainful employment. Everyone knows safety nets are only sometimes effective, so we decided that there was no point in making sure our social safety nets actually caught everyone. But this will help landlords who'll soon have their pick of new tenants to choose from, take the bond from, and then kick them out when they don't pay their rent. A malicious attack aimed at Te Whatu Ora in October has been revealed, along with acknowledgement that private information about staff in the Lower North Island was taken as part of the attack. Said Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here trying to take a photo and not realising he has the selfie camera on. Phew, it's a good thing we don't have plans to cull Health New Zealand's IT budget. How stupid would that be? Golden Bay Dr. Bruce Dooley, seen here disappointing that you trust scientists when it comes to science, has been named as the doctor who has been charged with supplying ivermectin he had stockpiled and distributed and encouraged people to have Omicron parties. The Health Practitioners Disciplinary Tribunal heard Dooley supplied between 62 and 250 people with self-styled ivermectin kits, although definite numbers are impossible to know since he didn't keep records. The tribunal felt his conduct amounted to professional misconduct. Said a spokesperson for the tribunal, "It's ironic that he was supplying people with a horse paste for parasites, because he's a parasite who was brought down by horse paste." A 6.8 magnitude earthquake in the South Island felt all over the Motu caused a small tsunami for about 90 minutes that was registered at the Paisaga Point measuring station. Due to the remote area, very little damage was caused directly by the 10 centimetre waves, said a spokesperson for Men Everywhere. Oh, that's totally bigger than 10 centimetres. It's at least 20. Well, that's what my partner tells me. Wellington train services were ground to a halt on Thursday morning twice after major signal outage issues leading to increased traffic on the capital's roads, said Transport Minister Chris Bishop, seen here with a toxic algae bloom that's impacting our fisheries sector. Just because this shows how fragile infrastructure is for public transport and how it can impact other forms of transport and why we might need to invest in it, the answer is still roads. All roads, nothing but roads. Apple Maps has rolled out a new feature that allows users to now search for Māori place names, iwi and marae. A number of iwi up and down the motu have been working on the project to identify areas of cultural significance and ensure consistency on information. Said a spokesperson for Apple, "It's an exciting new feature and we know all of our user of Apple Maps will love it." New Zealand-born character actor, two-time Tony Award and one-time Golden Globe nominee Clive Revill has passed away at the age of 94 in Los Angeles. His credits included the lead in the original Legend of Hell House, the Transformers movie, Billy Wilder's Avanti, The Snorks, Tiny Toon Adventures, Star Trek The Next Generation, Batman the Animated Series, and Babylon 5. So expect obituaries to start off with, man who voiced 2 lines as the original Emperor Palpatine in Empire Strikes Back has passed away. Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here trying to do the Macarena, is set to announce government plans to encourage a third supermarket competitor to enter the Aotearoa New Zealand market this weekend. Cabinet signed off on the plan last week and leaked documents reveal it is cunning in its simplicity. She's emailed Australia's Aldi customer service page and said, "Please, would love to have you here." The Long-Term Health New Zealand review that's just been released has shown that death rates over the past decade have doubled amongst patients who self-discharge from an emergency department, and that access to prompt and appropriate primary and hospital health care has deteriorated markedly. But that the second issue isn't solely the cause of the first. The report identifies issues within the health sector around fall injuries, staph infections, and an increase in wait time for first specialist appointments that added to the issues. Said a spokesperson for Te Whatu Ora, this report was commissioned by Lester Levy, and we're very, very disappointed naturally that it doesn't tell us how much Milo our team of health professionals need. A new poll by Talbot Mills shows a 14-point political approval rating for the presidency of Donald Trump by New Zealand men under the age of 40, the only demographic that saw his presidency policies as positive. The same poll also showed those most in support of Trump here in Aotearoa were likely to be ACT or New Zealand First voters. And while the alt-right in New Zealand are already crowing about these results, a spokesperson for the polling company said, "We are as shocked as you that parties that involve convicted child sex offenders, vilify trans people, push racist rhetoric, and cry about DEI and woke would attract people who think the man who's tanking the US economy and started a tariff war and has staff send classified documents in chat groups would be the best person to run things here." A new report from Acumen Edelman, known as the Trust Barometer, shows that 67% of New Zealanders express a sense of distrust and grievance with business, media, the government, and NGOs, now surpassing the global average. Said a spokesperson for the government, "I don't understand why people don't trust us. It's not like we did rushed things under urgency at record levels or shortened select committee times on bills we didn't want feedback on, caved to groups peddling conspiracies, or racism, made laws that make people concerned like getting rid of smoke-free legislation or making it easy to get automatic weapons, or treated people on benefits like something that we found on the soles of our shoes, while dismantling and vilifying the unique partnership that founded this country." A spokesperson for the media was asked for comment, but they were too busy vilifying female MPs with diverse backgrounds. April 1st sees a raft of changes kick in for benefits and low-wage earners. Job seeker support is increasing 2.22%, meaning a sole parent will see a whole $9 extra in their account. As new power prices also kick in on the same day, seeing power for an average house go up at least $10 a month. The minimum wage is also going up 1.5% to $23.50 an hour, an increase lower than the rate of inflation. Student loan repayments will also be going up as the repayment threshold has been frozen instead of adjusted for inflation as is usual. But don't worry, new visa categories also open on April 1st for multi-millionaire investment in return for a week-long holiday in the country every year. Said Prime Minister, seen here trying to teach Cabinet how to play gotcha knows, this year we're celebrating April Fool's Day the only way we know how, by making life harder for poor people. I mean, I know I find it funny. And finally, 2 Waitaha geckos living on a predator-free island near Canterbury are thought to be the world's oldest living geckos. Their estimated age is between 60 and 64, and this is based on work marking and tracking the pair done in 1967 by herpetologist Tony Whitaker. The lizards, named Antoinette and Brucey Baby, are now 6 times older than the average lifespan for a gecko. A spokesperson for DOC said it was a truly humbling experience to find the pair. It's not often you can meet lizards this old who don't run New Zealand first. And that is this week's The News. Thanks for watching. Done. And if I don't press the button now, we're not going to wrap up in time, and people will miss out on BHN, or they'll just leave. So, ka kite anō. Anything else you want to add, Blake? Now that I've unmuted you?
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. It was good to be back. We will be back next week with a pre-record, I think, with the Minister of
Rural Communities.
Rural Communities, yes.
Yep, Mark Patterson. All right, until next time, catch you all later.
Bye.
Oh, show's all over. You can go home now. If you stuck it out this long, I'm really impressed. Actually, if you're going to stick it out this long, why not look at becoming a YouTube member? Easy to do. Just press the YouTube member button. Until next time, I'll catch you later. I'm going to go and play with the Borg.